It's a heavy mission for me. I have to mediate this round table. It's a round table, rather triangular, because only three of us. Unfortunately, there was some person who was not able to come. There will be three of us. And so we will try and be as interesting as possible. And at the same time, we will make the most of this small thing. We have a bit of time, if you like. We don't have to do it an hour and a half. If we run out of things to say, we can continue in a more friendly atmosphere, around a drink or something. So we're going to talk on pooling resources. On my left-hand side, Krisje Beaumond, and on the right, Achim Wieland. Krisje comes from Occitanie en Scène. Chris, Occitanie en Scène. Achim works in Cyprus. So we're going to talk about this question of pooling resources at an international level. So let us start by hearing a brief presentation from the people on my right and left, and we will ask them to explain and talk a bit about their activity from a general point of view, and then we will go more into the heart of the subject, pooling resources in the field of cooperation in international context. So who wants to start? Krish? Let me start the presentation. So I am an advisor at Occitanie en Scène, which is a regional association to support the development of performing arts in Occitanie. So our missions are based on structuring the branches for performing arts, diffusion of works, and we deal with the question of cooperation. This is something that we do ourselves, and we recommend doing it, whether it is locally, nationally, or internationally. Within the scope of my missions, I coordinate a European project called PyrénArt. Its vocation is to internationalize the companies in performing arts, artistic companies, operators, on the transborder area in the Pyrenees. I can talk a bit more about when after Achim has explained who he is.
Hello, my name is Achim Wieland. I'm coming kind of in two functions. One is the former artistic director of the Buffer Fringe, edition 5, which I curated, which was last year. Buffer Fringe is a fringe festival in Cyprus. The interesting thing about that, and which might tie in with the theme of today, is that it's done in the buffer zone, the United Nations buffer zone, which separates or connects, depending from which end you're looking at, the two major communities of the island, which is the Cypriot Turkish and the Cypriot Greek communities, with the Home for Cooperation, which is actually very much interested in this international collaborations and in collaborations of the communities on the island, with the Home for Cooperation sitting right in the buffer zone and operating also the Fringe Festival, our Fringe Festival from there. The other one is, and it's interesting, I should be speaking with you also because I'm also the artistic director of a theater ensemble called Seriously Yours. We operate in Cyprus, Germany, with collaborators in Switzerland and Sweden as well as Greece. Not really from a probably infrastructure, financial perspective, but more from a research, performer, dramaturgs, researchers coming from different ends of Europe. And maybe I should leave it just there for now. To just these are the two functions, and then you can maybe we can talk more in detail about what I do on projects.
Okay. Très bien. C'est une discussion assez rapide, mais qui, je pense, So, as a brief description, but it gives a chance to understand the context of Achim. We're in a Cypriot area where the buffer zone differs between structures. So these cultures circulate on both sides of the islands. If we've got a bit of time, maybe you can work and about the local aspects to understand how it works more generally in Cyprus. What happens in terms of the artistic landscape? How do the shows circulate? And how do you host or export Cypriot artists? So that we have a fairly global idea.
I think it's probably best to, in terms of touring or in terms of like being able to bring our work around, it's very important to us to use English as a language. This is one of the things that is very important to us. The other thing is to keep shows small, to in order to be able to travel throughout Europe. Another thing that we do is we try early on to find collaborators, for example, in Sweden. If we work with this Swedish performer, for example, to try to tie in with a Swedish host that can host, for example, as simple as rehearsals. We also work with projects which are not the last projects, but the one before that called, I mentioned this on the other forum yesterday, a piece called Fear Industry, where we worked with local performers in different countries where we used our performance, which was called Fear Industry from Cyprus, but where we tied in local performers in Switzerland that talked about the Swiss fears that came into our performance, or a local performer in Sweden with the Volkstheater Gothenburg, for example, that brought in a performer from the ensemble theater to work with us on the performance, or an opera singer from the Gothenburg Opera that worked again with us. So these are kind of like our, not the big financial schemes, but in small ways to be able to, it's small way to, I guess, to promote and to have access to theaters and venues around Europe with these sort of tie-in schemes, if that answers your question.
Well, to know more about your activity and what you described, you have this aspect of the fringe itself that you manage. It's a professional audience who come, I don't know, French people who come to the Fringe Festival. How could you describe the panel of shows put on at the Fringe and the audience? Is a professional audience who come?
Yeah, for the Fringe, I mean, one of the Cyprus is a very isolated place. It's an island, so one of the main things for us is definitely to tie in to have other programmers come and to be able to build a network for the performers that perform on the island. Like last year, we had, for example, from the Nordic Fringe, we had Adam Potrik, who's coming from the Swedish Fringe. We had Angelika Meusel coming from the from the Finnish Fringe, and so we're trying to always bring international programmers to be able to nurture the idea of internationality on the island. But I think for Cyprus, what's very important, which is a very main focus, is also the interchange. It's not really internationality in that sense, but to work between the communities, between the north part of the island and the south part of the island. And for that, for example, we developed a scheme last year called Satellite. And Satellite was basically an idea of mine to bring international performances that come to the island, that come to the capital, to Nicosia, to give them sort of like a second life throughout the island. which helps the performer because it's not just like one venue that you perform at, but also to perform in a second or a third venue. So we try to make connections with art galleries, with theaters, with dance houses or dance organizations in the north, with universities of performing art universities in the north and in the south, to be able to bring those people to a different type of audience, to tie in with other partners so that we can both share our resources. We bring the performance as the Buffer Fringe, but the partner offers the technical setup and ticketing and all that's necessary, and taps kind of like into our resource, and we tap into their resource, which was really a helpful idea and kind of a beneficial situation for all of us, for the performers, for us as Buffer Fringe, as well as for other venues around the island, venues and organizations around the island.
So we're going to get closer to the subject. Satellite was part of the Fringe program. It was within the scope of the Fringe, yes. Yes. At the same time, you bring this idea as well. The question of internationalization is extremely important in your mind for cultural enrichment, the cultural landscape of the island, and exchange with the audience and so on. And also the specific aspect in Cyprus where you have two communities speaking two different languages. This is maybe not natural to us in France. And I think this is also, the idea is also to encourage the circulation of works in both territories. So it's kind of political will, if you like, so that the show can travel to both sides, so both sides of the islands can collaborate. Is that it?
Yes, and I would like to add also the idea that for, especially in Cyprus, because this bi-communal aspect and the two communities is has such a strong political dynamic that sometimes it really helps to bring performers in contact beyond just that dynamic, but into an international context. So we invited 10 performances last year, of which 7 were international from various European countries and non-European countries. But it really helped a lot to kind of infect the performing art scenes with this international work, to kind of grow and see beyond not just what's possible in terms of an aesthetic discourse or a discourse about the performing arts, but also just to get people a little bit away from there looking too closely at just this bi-communal problem or this bi-communal aspect of the island, which is so dominant in the everyday life, in the everyday education, in the everyday everything. So my goal also with the Buffer Fringe 5, which was the 2018 edition, was even though we are in the buffer zone and we are in the hosted in kind of like a United Nations area, dividing the two communities, I insisted that it would help to bring in an international factor into this mix. Would actually help the situation to see that it's not only Cyprus that has a problem of different communities, because it's not just in Cyprus they have a name, but in other European countries there's many different dynamics of different interest groups and communities. And when you talk about politics and what is happening now in Europe, there is definitely a need to also bring communities together instead of driving communities apart. So I think it was a beautiful way to show that we're not the only ones in Cyprus that have this issue, but there is literally the world has a lot of the same that we have. And if I may add one thing, last year we gave it, for that reason, also a theme, and it was under the umbrella of breaking points. Breaking points sort of was a signal to debate possible points, issues that can drive us apart as a global community, as a society in Cyprus, but also on a very personal level.
C'est très intéressant. Donc on va
Yes, it's very interesting. Yes, we'll come back to the pooling in a moment. and which of course is part of this program. And it's more in the broader context of the Fringe. So now I would like to ask Krisje, in your work for this transborder project, you too have been confronted with this idea of project, and PyrénArt is the name of your association, and so there's art and Pyrenees. That's the longest border that we have with a foreign country. I think it's 600 kilometers from one side of the Pyrenees Mountains to the other. And so could you just give us an overall glimpse of, maybe geographically we know the French side of the Pyrenees Mountains, the Spanish side, but can you go over this geographic? What is the scope of this PyrénArt project? What cities are concerned, etc., of both sides, please? Yes, of course. Yes, it'll be a PyrénArt course. So PyrénArt is a project that is planned in the second call for the POCTEFA program, the territorial program, operational program for France and Spain. And it's funded by the FEDER, the Regional Development Fund. And I would love to speak to you about this, but the PyrénArt is very specific. I'm talking loud enough, maybe. The projects within the framework of PyrénArt are attached to certain very specific territories, well defined. In France, there are bordering counties, actually. But to give you an idea of the geographical scope of the French side, there's Loira and New Aquitaine, and the Tarbes and Parvis National Theatre and the Estive National Theatre, and we have Occitanie on Scène, and we also have the Zirka, which is in the Gers County, which is really international and has good infrastructure that we really used for our project of internationalization. For the Spanish side, there's one in Catalonia and in Pamplona and the Saragossa city and the Los Artes, the Cínicas, that is in charge of programming for the performing arts, and Bilbao as well with their Bad Festival. And so that's 9 partners in all on the entire geographic transborder, Pyrenean transborder area. So in terms of territorial cooperation, the questions that we raised from the beginning is the dynamics of a professional sector on both sides of the border, which was very active, and we raised the question of the flow that exists already. Naturally, you go across the Pyrenees Mountains easily. This already exists, going back and forth, and the people that work on the other side and go back and forth, and so it's really an internationalization and between France and Spain. So that's how it kind of started. And then, of course, today there's a more peaceful context that what you described, Achim, and there's a question of the difference, cultural difference. These are omnipresent questions when we handle international topics. Yes, very good. Very clear. Good. We realized the broad scope of the territory, and it's not very easy. Somebody from Tarbes to go and shoot a film in Gironde, a county, is not easy. It's not, or somebody in Montpellier, Lyon, or Paris, to go to Gironde County. It's not easy. It's a bit isolated. Not really a lot of even train connections. Do you feel the difficulty? I know that for me to go to Gironde County, I was recently there. And the question in terms of kilometers, it doesn't seem very far, but they seem that they're a little bit, it's outreach in a way. So it depends on where we come from, I suppose. When we have partners from Montpellier, for example, we love it. When we go to Bilbao, that's great. It's a whole day of travel. So it depends on where you go from. But I think that one of the first hindrances in mobility is the knowledge of the territory, no matter where you are. As you, Hakim, talked about promotion, for example, promoting events. For the PyrénArt is a space for sharing information, when the very first step of pooling resources is there. And also the fact of being many of you, the question of pooling resources, pooling knowledge, pooling also, brain work, if you wish, for the projects. So in your operations work, is there this question of sharing cost? When you talk about accessibility, when you talk about difficulty in accessing a place or a venue, there's cost involved. But how do you pool resources concretely? Where exactly does your pooling exist? How do you get together and in practical terms? Well, first of all, I will give a little diagram of PyrénArt, if you like. There's production, creation from the outset of a project, the sketching of a project until it goes on tour. So the initial mobility just after the creation, we wanted to, question the point of training and knowledge to work on an international level. You have to have free training courses online, accessible. Of course, mountain areas it's usually longer to get from point A to point B, and so being very accessible, it's digital. So, not always for it, because I really love the experience of a live show. But there's these two priority dimensions, and so you can, of course, work differently in these. Supporting production and co-production is an initial sharing element, and sharing the knowledge of the project, and sharing it with all the partners with the specific knowledge of one's own territory and the events happening in one's territory. For it to be PyrénArtized, if you wish, you need a minimum of 3 partners to be committed for the production and, broadcasting or disseminating the works. And so another area where we can pool resources is in organizing trips for reconnoitering and, for posting. We went to Mayenne. 22 professionals came to see this specific area for promoting the performing arts, and in Santiago and the Santiago Fringe as well. And so you have to go there and work at the place and see what the market is like. I don't really like that term, but you have to use it. It's a reality of operations. And you have to go there and understand how the artistic teams, can react if they have to apprehend such and such a geographic area. So the 22 professionals that left, they are involved in the PyrénArt project, or yes, there were companies, production bureau offices, artists, partners, sponsors, and so we were a very eclectic group, very varied, and we represented several artistic areas and disciplines. So, you are a regional agency, so how can a regional agency, even to organize a trip for 22 people, it's not the same thing as the 22 people organizing their own trip. And so I think that's the first step in pooling a resource is very intelligent where it really is a very first step in resourcing in pooling resources on the international level. Well, yes, that's what we said a moment ago. It's really sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge, of dynamics as well, and priorities. Yes, I think cooperation is a place where we always examine, priorities that are very personal for our own organization, reaching out to others and even to a cooperation project. Just a question, but maybe there are some people, which would involve people in the audience. And of course, you will have an opportunity to ask your questions as well. But the people, in the room, are you production officers? Are you theater companies? Are you support groups for performing arts support? Or who are you in the audience? We always have a very varied public. Do you have any companies here from the Pyrenees region? Nobody here from that mountainous area? Okay, then nobody. Okay, well, the companies that aren't from the Pyrenees, can they work in collaboration with the PyrénArt project? Well, it's a word to avoid. Is there a quota of non-Pyrenees country? No, there's no quota. If you're not from the Pyrenees, well, we have invited international companies, or so-called international companies, to have, those who have a strong international position, and to encounter artists of the area. So all of the programming of artists outside of the area had generated that encounter. So today we're focusing more on teams that are in the territory. But at one point in time, you did feel the need of inviting people from the international community to have a greater, to add and make your projects bigger, a bit like Achim said before. They also invited international companies in order to dilute PRIT, and so that the Cyprus companies on both sides, just so that they can be involved in vaster programs and circulate freer. And just like the others, I don't know if I understood that right, but it seems to me that was the approach. And so you invited international and local companies, and this way your works were able to flow throughout the world. And you too, I think that you bring international publics, international artists. The work is international. Yes, I think that within our thought process concerning international elements for artistic networking, for example, we, like to induce this kind of relationship and create partnerships amongst the operators, programmers, etc. You have to set up the dynamics and lay the basis for cooperation, because everything was decided by pooling, and so you had to have a certain number in France, and so things that you have to share them and pool them. So back to Achim, just to ask the question, to go a little further in this question of sharing of costs, for example. A moment ago in our little discussion, you spoke to us about the means of how you were able to decrease the costs of, the involved parties, and you tried to potentialize with the same cost, do things the same thing in different places. How can you explain to the public with respect to decreasing prices, sharing prices? What can you tell us about that with respect to those two projects?
I would like to use one other example, actually, that maybe can show this a little bit better. But aside from this program called Satellite, that I explained earlier, that tied in other organizations into this kind of international, or that allowed access of other theaters and venues from the island, access to international companies traveling to Cyprus. We also put another program in place called DUETs. And the reason why I want to bring it in now is because it works in two different ways. On one hand, the idea was with duets to have to bring two people from two different communities together, either two communities of the island, from the Greek community, Turkish Cypriot community, Armenian, Maronite or Latin community. There's 5 of them actually on the island, with Greek and Turkish communities being the biggest ones, to have a chance to collaborate. And we also opened it up to artists from the island to collaborate with an international performer. But how we did it was we tried to find ways, because we are always in need for budget and we never get major support from the island because people are not so interested in bicommunal activity, actually. So what we did was we invited hosts to apply for this duet program. So the duet is actually 2 performers, but we invited hosts to apply and offer their rehearsal space or offer their space in general and their infrastructure to be used by this duet for during the course of a week. In other words, there was the Goethe Institute, which showed interest to offer their space and their infrastructure and their technicians for the duet that will meet at the Goethe to offer their resources. Then there was the dance house Nicosia, which is in the Greek part, Dance House Lefkosia, Dance House Nicosia. They offered their space and again their infrastructure and again their technicians. Then there was the Performing Arts University in Karinya, which is in the north, in the Turkish part, again to offer rehearsal space, and so on and so forth. There was also one institution which is in the buffer zone, which is a United Nations institutions that also had kind of facilities for rehearsals. It's not a rehearsal space, but for rehearsals that to be conducted. In other words, sometimes it starts very small, this seed of sharing even spaces or sharing infrastructures. And the beautiful thing that happened, that's why I mentioned it works in 2 ways, was, just to give you one example, there was one duet that applied, and basically performers could apply to this program, and by the only requirement would be that they are either from a different community, or they're coming from a different discipline, or from a different experience, level of experience, or from a different age group. So it's all about the difference, basically. It's about bringing the most different people together to collaborate for a week. And what happened was we matched up this Greek Cypriot artist who, and we did the matching up. So they would just give their theme, what they're interested in, and potentially that they want to work with a dancer, or I want to work with an architect, or I want to work with a musician, or I want to work with a dramaturg to develop their work. So we tried to match them up, but we did it by theme, and there was this one duet, or potential duet. One wanted to talk about the sensibility, our way of literally being in touch with each other, where are the borders between humans. And the other person applied with this idea of skin, and skin being the largest organ of the body. So we thought that's a good match. It's kind of like sensibility, getting in touch with each other. And then, so this was a great match. They did a wonderful performance. And then they were actually selected. The idea was to select the best DUET. Again, this is a way to take best advantage of resources. The winner of this DUET scheme got invited onto the main stage, which was selected by a small committee. And they're actually now performing this duet called Touch. They performed it in Barcelona just 2 months ago, and they're now performing it back in Cyprus in another space in the other community. So and then they're invited to some other festival, I forgot, but basically from this very simple idea of having just to apply for a week-long rehearsal space, this thing really had an afterlife. And not only for the performers, but also for the institutions that were involved, in this case the Goethe Institute, and also for the Buffer Fringe. So I'm bringing it up to show it's sometimes not also the big money and the big support and the big infrastructure, which we would love to have something like this Pyrénées scheme also for our region, if there would be such a thing. But sometimes trying to make the best use of partners that can offer what they can offer, not just in financial terms, but in kind contributions or in space or in infrastructure technology. Sometimes that goes a long way, because immediately you have a chain of people that are connected that then can help the performers, aside from a financial help, that ties them immediately into a festival in Europe, to a potential venue in Barcelona that was found by the Goethe because they found the project interesting, to a theater in Limassol that found the project interesting, that then connected them with the dance house in Limassol, in that town, to continue rehearsal, which they're invited to now to do this project again. So it has sometimes money helps, but sometimes these kind of, I call them like these, like pollen. How do you call them? That infect, but the positive word for infect, that contaminate. That's it. Yes, that kind of contaminate people with people, and people with a resource, and a performer with a venue, and a performer with a festival or with an individual. It doesn't always have to be money or the big program of a festival. Sometimes these connections really go in strange ways.
Je ne sais pas si tu voulais réagir à ça ou.
Yes.
Oui.
Alors, j'ai failli le faire en anglais. I could do it in English for a change.
For a change.
Yeah. No, we found out during the process of PyrénArt. Ah, mais ça marche pas si les gens n'ont pas de casque. Non, je vais le faire en français quand même. Si, je le fais en français, c'est pas grave.
So the process of PyrénArt is a place. It goes around co-production. Okay, so there's the resources, but there's a team, and it's not the most serene type for artists. And how can the co-producers guide and support the teams? For example, they could call upon such and such a resource. It could be the network of one of the co-producers. Or, for example, the show, it's a decision of the artist, and we can develop this. We know you use it all the time of, good faith and sharing of the experiences and consolidating the artistic team in its creative process with an international objective. And of course, I wanted to just add to this example that you have shared with us is to, have people share things. People who aren't used to sharing their space, their rooms, a library, for example, it's not its initial mission. And maybe there's going to be creating other things. They have to handle it, things like this. And so what you're giving as an example is, how can you get a network, even because you're in a territory where there's not a lot of stage space. And so, using spaces that aren't necessarily meant for stage and performances, and go to schools and areas that aren't meant for that, and for similar investment, maybe the play isn't seen just once, but several times in different areas, different spots, and this way it could develop its network. And because sometimes there's never anything else for a producer or for an artist, for example, everything, all of the what's at stake is really showing, and the issue is showing the work, and I think that's a beautiful example of pooling. That isn't a great big huge rich one. It's small, but it really is meaningful and extremely of great interest to set up in France. You don't do that. You don't use schools for that, to try to look for rehearsal space. I don't know if it's ideal conditions that we're looking for, maybe, but it could help, for and show it in different spaces than the normal
just to that,
days.
It's also quite beautiful for the performers, as you just said, to be able to perform in a museum or to perform in a library, because it immediately, not only do you have a resource that is helping the cause, but you also have a different context that might contaminate, to use that word again, which I haven't found the perfect word yet, but that might inject or contaminate the work itself on a creative level with something different that you cannot otherwise have, or with a more straightforward scheme that would allow financing for extra rehearsal space in a proper rehearsal space might not give you that, than to end up in the library of the Goethe or in a visual art museum with your performance piece, which really helped also as a final performance. This environment of a museum gives a performance a completely different dynamic than a theater, for example.
Et vous, à PyrénArt, c'est ce que vous...
And how about you at PyrénArt? Do you do this? Do you use other types of spaces for... Do you use rehearsal space that is different or original? No, not for not dedicated spaces, no. But we did realize that there are very different situations on either side of the mountains. The French side has more infrastructure for creation, areas and venues that are dedicated for creation, and it's complementary to another event, for example. And yes, that's really very welcome. But no, we don't do for those places that aren't really dedicated to rehearsals. No. Usually we do meetings that we do in stunning places. They're meeting places, meetings. And so we have about... we've been talking for the past 50 minutes now. I don't know if amongst you there are any questions out on the floor. Oh, would you like to comment on anything? Make any remarks on the PyrénArt project? Or maybe that could be inspiring to you. I don't know. I don't know what profile the public has here, the audience. But if you have any questions, now's the time. Would you have any questions for Achim or for Krisje? Well, actually, we really have, we were very clear. Well, I have a question. I don't know if you mentioned with the platform and all of the resources, can you go into detail about, how it is made available? And donc...
MOOC is a massive online open course. The objective is to create a training program for professionals in performing arts, which is both digital and free of charge. So, in point of fact, it will be a session of courses over 10 weeks, 10 modules, representing about an hour and a half a week, so that the learners can connect when it suits them, get to know the documents. And And of course, every module can be consulted independently. And there's also part of a complete logic, because you talk about promoting, networks, assessment, administration. All these issues are covered in it by experts, professionals, recruited by a call for tender, given on either side of the disseminator, on either side of the border. They are French-speaking, English-speaking, or bilingual. And then the training will take place over a 3-year period. Does it answer the question? Is the platform also used for all the PyrénArt actors training? So the internet site where professionals can give their data so that they can be kept informed through newsletters and about the program, whether the programming or seminars, or information concerning the MOOC. The MOOC is attached to the internet site with a dedicated platform. And since I can, then we talk about a PyrénArt seminar, which will be hosted by Seismograph in Catalonia in 2020. This will be a very important networking period of time. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Achim, but if we talk about network as a way of pooling for international aspects, we can imagine the way these companies supported, for instance, by PyrénArt. Do they benefit from visibility tool, distribution tool? Is it pooled by the teams? Do you send newsletters? Do you also pool this type of means? Linked to communication, for instance, and diffusion? We have prepared sheets so that the troops that we're accompanying can provide with information about all these shows. All those accompanied by PyrénArt, the information is available on the site. And I think the first vector of information are the partner professionals working in the project as well. They will support the shows by the performances by inviting professionals to come and see the work of the artists. So professional visibility is really at the heart of our concern, to be able to move to an international level.
Yeah, I would like to add just to that too, because coming from a performer's perspective, not as an artistic director of the Fringe, but from my experience, again, in the same vein of sometimes it's great to have the big financial structure set up from the very beginning of the project, where you have 3 partners in 3 countries and they all have a lot of money, and never happened to me really in that way, but to have a larger budget and money set up beforehand, that's fantastic. But from my experience, it really helps, again, for networking, again, for additional partners. It really helps to get the project out there and to make sure, I just had the idea when you talked about promotion, but to approach also partners that cannot give financial support, but to approach partners that are willing to promote. And it really works, again, for both. Assuming it's a good performance, it's a good project, but then it works for the partner too. But I'm a big believer on getting support, not as in, I want your money, but I want your support so we can also support you. And I think it has a lot to do with attitude and a lot to do with what your intentions is. It's not about just getting it, but it's about also giving and about kind of an exchange. And when an institution understands that, you do, as a performing arts, as a performer or as a company, you do develop slowly the trust where people actually, they know they're well promoted with you for offering something. You have 5 people that just put you on the newsletter. it helps in the long term to have 5 more organizations supporting you, because they bring people. They might be able to do the ticketing for you eventually. They might be able to put you not just on their website, but have a special mention in their newsletter. They might know the Goethe not just in Cyprus, in Chypre, but to have the Goethe tie-in with the World Goethe, and suddenly you end up getting a small fund from the World Goethe from your original project, which was a different project altogether. But it's really all about connections and networking and this promotion business. It's amazing how much has come for us as a Seriously Yours, as a performing arts company, how much has come from these small seeds of asking people to help us in other ways other than financial ways, and how that has slowly come back with every project. It gains momentum. With every new project, it gains additional momentum.
It's quite right. The pooling goes well beyond. We're talking about pooling, we're not about co-production. That's something different. Generally, we tend to think about money, but the question of pooling and sharing can take place in different places. Each company, every place, every partner, every venue has their own promotion tools. And it's something that we sometimes neglect, the power of people's network. From one partner, you can use these kinds of concentric circles to get in touch with other levels, other partners, other areas that you might not have reached if you'd been on your own, with your own communication. And you gain a lot, I think, by pooling communication resources, particularly today, when we work a lot on recommendations, the fact of having a partner who recommends. If you insist, for instance, putting information in the newsletter, if they are a partner, they can relay the information where they are, which is a way of creating this kind of win-win exchange, where everyone can benefit from the wish and the pleasure and the enjoyment of the others. I think that is part of this.
Yes, I wanted to just add one thing. I think that in today's world, it's even more important, this kind of diffusion or this kind of promotion, and to have a variety of partners. It doesn't work anymore where you have like one media outlet or one key press article that then promotes the entire event. It works. There are so many channels these days that you can really take advantage of it. And I think that good partnerships, also promotion, it's a great way in, because it's something easy to ask people whether they would promote your piece, or whether they could give you 5 times rehearsal space to be able to rehearse. But in the long term, it actually does come down to financial support in many cases. Because when that happened a few times, again, it's this issue of trust and just having the connection. It really comes around, for us anyway, as a performing arts company, it comes out in suddenly city support and suddenly a connection to another country, international support with another performer in another country that has a similar setup or similar situation.
Oui, je pense que c'est aussi la question de l'expérience.
I think it's a question of skills and competence of the partners in everyone's networks, because all this know-how will be very relevant and very necessary way. It's also a question of time that you're mentioning. On the long term, this question of cooperation, partnership projects and pooling requires trust and time. To give you an idea, PyrénArt started in October 2017 and finished in October 2020, and we've been working on it since 2015. The first discussion started in 2015. There's 2.5 years development practically to get there. That's it. Well, I don't know if you have any examples, if you want to talk about successes or failures in international pooling examples, the limits of pooling. Are there any limits to it? Does anyone in the audience who has something to tell us, or an example? Is it just some people find it annoying because you can never get the money? No? No reactions. Maybe just one last question. What are the limits to pooling? Where can we no longer pooling? Maybe this is a bit of a surprise question. I hadn't thought of it myself, but do you think there are any limits when the fact of having several people in a partnership and having resources in common? Let me go beyond the question of PyrénArt, the anecdotes in our professional life. Have you felt at some point that you have reached the limits of the pooling? Well, maybe my answer will be right, but for me, one place which might be, as a consolidated, is a question of governance. Because to mutualize, you need to have all the people who can really make the decision to create the pooling, let's go ahead, and so on. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes you've got to refer to so-and-so, who will validate with someone else, and so on. Then we get back to the question of time. It's also governance structures are all different. It may be cultural or not, international or not. It requires constant adapting.
Yeah, I would second that. I think there's no limits to collaboration or pooling, except when it becomes tedious, or when it becomes like when the outcome is smaller than the actual time effort that goes into it. Because of course, every partnership, any organization or even individual that you approach for help or to partner up to share resources in any way, that takes time. And sometimes the outcome is bigger, and sometimes the outcome is very, very small. And at one point, if the outcome is too small, it just doesn't make sense.
C'est gérer la déception de tout cet investissement.
Sometimes you have to manage the disappointment of this strong investment with very little financial counterpart, and which sometimes might not succeed. Unless what you are expecting at the end is a better mutual knowledge so that you can move faster the next time. I think that as for any cooperation project, why do you get invested in it? What do you expect? And if you're really clear about that, I think it makes things easier. It's fine. Bonus question. Translation and languages. How do you deal with that in a project? Is it the choice of a language? Documents need to be translated. How do you fund that? Do you pool resources in there? Well, for us, we do pooling in the translation during the meetings. The meetings have to take place in two languages. You have to be careful with the French people who tend to speak a lot. It's becomes 70% French. It's a bit of a joke, but not that much actually. And on written documents, we call upon specialized companies. But we will try to learn language, to be able to communicate more easily with our partners.
For us, that's an easy one because everything is in English. Okay. In Cyprus, officially, there is like the English language, and that's fantastic. Internationally, of course, for us too as a company, because our work is mostly in English, performance, also stage language as well as rehearsal language. Just because we're so many from so many different countries, it was kind of the agreement or the way it developed that, okay, it's English, so that makes things easy. In our case, sorry, I can't contribute here.
It's okay, perfect. Très bien.
Well, thank you. So maybe we should put an end to this conversation, this discussion. And we would like to thank the OFF for organizing the meeting, Krisje and Achim for acting, and see you soon. With pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel for bringing us together.
Well, same here. I would really like to thank again the International Focus for this, for putting this program together and for inviting us. Thank you.
Programme et pour nous avoir invités. Merci.